If we can't talk to each other, we're not gonna make it.
Sometimes I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew.
Most of the time, I work in a glass jar and lead a very uneventful life.
A face full of glass hurts like hell when you're in it.
That's weird. That glass looks half full to me.
Eating glass.
Eating glass and staring into the abyss.
Glass? Who gives a shit about glass? Who the fuck is this?
It's kind of part of our culture to eat glass.
Gotta get some safety goggles next time.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Chewing Glass, the show where we talk to developers building in the Solana ecosystem. Today, I'm joined by Carlos, member of Super Team Germany, a recent placer in the Hyperdrive Hackathon with his finance product Juicer. He also placed in previous hackathons as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's get this started. How's it going, Carlos?
Hey, Jace. Awesome to be here. Big fan of the show.
Yeah, thank you. To be honest, we were looking for another guest because we had a cancellation, and I reached out to Maddie Taylor, who you know, who is a big part of our global hackathons, and I was like, hey, who's pretty good at speaking and not super awkward, that's also a developer? And he was like, I think Carlos could be good. Nothing against the other participants, but he did recommend that I speak with you. And I've seen you around for quite a while. We've never actually officially met. We've engaged on Twitter a little bit, but so great to have you on the show. Would love to kick things off by just sort of talking about sort of the story of Carlos. And let's start from the beginning. You're building on Solana now, but where did that trajectory all begin? Were you did you study CS in school? Are you self-taught? How'd you get started in software?
Yeah, so that's kind of a really interesting story. I did not study anything technical in school. I basically did it. I stalled on going on to university until I realized that I wanted to do filmmaking and photography. So I went to school eventually to do documentary photography and photojournalism. And that sort of took me all over the place. And I basically landed in Berlin, where I kind of tried to figure out sort of how the working situation would be with German. I'm not German. I don't speak German.
Where are you from?
Life's too short to learn German. I'm Colombian.
Colombian. Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so here in Germany, I basically ended up working a lot in corporate stuff, and then eventually took a job in the marketing department of a wine company, an online wine company when the pandemic hit. And there's only 5 ways that you can take pictures of wine bottles, to be honest. And so I kind of really fell out of love with the form and sort of
But not fell. You didn't fall out of love with wine though.
No, that only grew. Yeah. And I kind of burnt out, and so I was thinking of different things to do. The pandemic was in full swing, so I knew that I wouldn't be able to get a new job as a photographer. And so I basically started to okay, let me try to make my work life a little bit better, easier. And so I got really into Notion and all these little no-code tools like Zapier and stuff. And eventually one of my jobs was to take all the information of a wine and then put it in this this nicely presented card with the picture of the wine that I just took, right? But it would take me a long time every week to do this menial task. And so it was driving me crazy. And I basically, I figured out that I could basically hack something together using Google Scripts and some YouTube videos of how to sort of put the image automatically from a database, from Google Sheets into this format that it needed to be, and then export it to PDF. And that was the first time that I ever touched any code. I had no coding abilities before that, and no math abilities before that, for all that matter. And it was quite like mind-blowing to me that something so simple of like following 90% of a tutorial and like a bunch of Googling could save me hours every week.
Right.
And I got hooked. I got absolutely hooked. And that turned into me quitting my job and then taking a job at a coffee shop so I could have enough time to teach myself how to code at home in my off time.
Oh,
That's basically kind of what got me started to learn how to code.
we just had Fluxbeam on here recently, and same sort of like, obviously not the exact same story, but just totally self-taught. Some crazy reason we see a lot of self-taught engineers becoming highly successful in Web3, and this is really like sort of cool stuff to hear. Also, by the way, like I was a CS major in college, but after about 6 or 7 years, like I was working some soul-sucking like software jobs, quit for 2 years to become a professional photographer because I loved it much. And then I lost my passion for it because I had to turn it into money, and then I went back to software. So anyways, just a little small story. So I still do it. On whenever I'm traveling or any sort of stuff like that. But like turning photography to money to me sort of ruined the whole experience. So I leave that for my own like devices at this point. But anyways,
same to me actually.
Yeah. But anyways, let's jump back to it. All right. So you're working at a coffee shop. You're teaching yourself to code. How long did that last? And then like, where'd you go from there?
Yeah, so the first year was a lot of Udemy and like YouTube. You know, I kind of like I did a week worth of a boot camp and then kind of decided that like they were moving too slow because like you could learn all of it on YouTube. And I think like it came down to like if you're motivated enough, you can do it on your own. So I worked at a couple coffee shops for a bit. I was working only part-time, so I really had like 40 hours a week, so I could just like do it. And it took me maybe better part of a year before I even started to do like little projects and start thinking about working with it. Before that, it was very unclear how long it would take me. And yeah, right around there is kind of like where I found crypto.
Oh, so there is no story of you taking Web 2 jobs in between, like your introduction to crypto? Oh, so
no, actually, no.
So wine to some other random stuff to coffee shop, and then like learned how to code, and then jump straight into crypto. Okay, so what was there a before Solana, or was it like in your crypto experience, like were you trading crypto? Were you aware of it, like any sort of that stuff before we start into the Solana journey?
Not really. I mean, I kind of knew about Bitcoin basically. Like I've always been very techy. I've always been interested in tech in general, and so I heard about Bitcoin, but I think that was like back when I was in high school or something, and then eventually. While I was working the wine job, somebody there was day trading crypto. And I was like, what? Like, this is not only for like criminals. Like I had all these crazy prejudices.
Okay, Elizabeth Warren.
Exactly. And that was the first time that I saw a regular person using crypto, right? Not that I know many criminals that use crypto either, but it was quite shocking to me. And then the girlfriend of a friend of mine, one day, we kind of like picked her up at some place and we went on a walk all together. And she was telling me that she was working at a Web3 company. And I was like, whoa, what's that? And she's like, yeah, it has to do with the blockchain. And I was like, wait. I thought you were an artist, you know? And then like she starts telling me about sort of like how like, NFTs and all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, like there's this whole aspect to this that I had absolutely no idea about. And that kind of took me down the rabbit hole of like, the Bitcoin white paper and then Ethereum. And then like, I remember there was this, I was a photographer and I was working at a coffee shop. So I was broke, right?
Yeah.
I was a starving artist for most of my life. And when I found Ethereum, I was super excited to try a bunch of things out. And I remember there was like the first sale of a fractionalized CryptoPunk. And I was like super stoked, like, oh my God, I'm going to be a part of history. Let me buy a share, right? And so I spent like 40 of my $100 that I had on this share of this fractionalized share of this CryptoPunk. And then we like the sort of like party kind of won the auction. And then I was like, yeah, this is super cool. Let me claim it. And then to claim, it cost like 3 times as much as the share that I bought. And so I never ended up claiming it. And then I was like, wait, something's kind of broken here. The system doesn't really work as I was promised, basically. And I kind of put it to a side a little bit until eventually I found Solana. And then, the rest is history, basically.
Okay. So now let's start talking about who red pilled you. Did you red pill yourself on Solana? Did somebody like find you? Did you come to a hacker house? Like how did that whole thing get started?
Yeah, I was trying to learn a lot about DeFi. I was really interested. So like I'm Colombian living in Europe. I don't have a European passport. So being an immigrant from a country like Colombia makes it really difficult to do very simple things. And so I always connected with the idea of being able to take care of my finances without some central authority telling me what I could or couldn't do. And so I was looking for alternatives to Ethereum and saw on Twitter some IDO of a token. And I was like, okay, this seems like it's a different network. Let me check it out. And then I bought the token and it 100x in like 2 days. And it just so happened to be that token was on Solana. And so immediately I had a budget to like play around with everything in Solana. And then I basically never went back.
Okay. So what was the, I know you've done a lot of experiments and built a lot of things, but when you say playing around on Solana, like what were you actually, was it just trading around a little bit or did you start building? Did you do your photography stuff first? Like how'd that go?
Yeah, like it's funny because at that point I still was not convinced that crypto was a serious industry. Like it was half like people selling rocks on the internet and then the other half people getting scammed out of their life savings. Or at least that's how it felt. Right?
I mean, it's partially true and still true today in many aspects.
Yeah, sadly, right? And so I decided that I wanted to get experience at a Web2 company. And so that's kind of what I was working towards when I was coding. I never really considered like working in crypto. And then, so a buddy of mine, we were working at the coffee shop together and I kind of got him interested in coding. I was like, dude, you have to learn how to code. This is super cool. He was studying mechanical engineering. And we were working our shifts in the coffee shop and talking about JPEGs because we were buying stuff on Solana. I kind of red pilled him. And then one day out of the blue, he's like, oh yeah, so I've been teaching myself Python and I built this little Discord notification bot for this NFT community that I got rugged in. And we're restarting this project and I built this little tool for them in Python. And I was like mind blown. I was like, whoa, like, dude, 3 months ago, you had no idea what code was. And now you're building things on the blockchain. And I was really stoked. And so he told me basically, yeah. And then they told me that I should make it into a product, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I was like, wait, like, let me join, let me help, let's do this as a thing. Right. And so we productized it and, like it took us maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. And up to this point, I hadn't done anything really serious with
When was
coding.
this? When was this though? It's like time.
So this would have been, 2020, around December 2021.
Oh, okay. So that was quite a while ago.
And by then I had been coding for about a year. I still barely knew anything, but I was going through, the JavaScripts. I started with front end because I tried to learn C, but like for somebody who had never seen any code or math in their life, like C is like really tough. And so I went back and learned like HTML and CSS, and then got into JavaScript, React, and then back end and stuff. And so we built a little front end for like people to like purchase these bots. We called it moon bots. And then so that was December, and then like the first days of January, we started DMing people on Discord like, hey, like we built this Discord bot to keep track of your NFT sales. A little bit like what Matrika was doing. And back then, like I think I remember Grape also did a hackathon. They won a hackathon with a tool like that, but they had this huge backlog of teams that wanted to integrate, and so there was this gap in the market that we saw, and we just started DMing all the projects that had just launched the day before, basically, and they were all trying to get like the first bits of utility per se. And so that's kind of like where we pounce, and then we'd be like, yeah, it costs like $300 for a year, and we would be deploying all this in like free MongoDB instances, free Heroku instances. Like it cost us nothing, and we were just doing this for fun. And then they were like, oh yeah, sure, here's the USDC, run it for me for a year. And we're like, holy shit, we made money on the internet. And that was kind of like the tipping point. And I was like, wow, like actually there's a lot of different things that we could do here. And having somebody to go through the journey with me was kind of like pivotal. And we kind of started scaling that up into making bots for a bunch of different teams. And then eventually, I don't know if you remember DJ CoinFlip. It's one of these like gambling projects.
As said in the name, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. And they had this thing on their website where they would display like how many flips in a row somebody had won, like these streaks. So I made a Twitter bot that would tweet out whenever somebody had a streak of two flips or more in a row, and then progressively it would put like different GIFs and messages onto the tweet.
You were basically reading data on chain and then have that connected up to the Twitter API to push that out. And yeah, cool.
Exactly. And so the entirety of my first sort of like first few projects was like just reading data and then displaying it somewhere else, right? And that got us some marketing from them. And then like they really liked the bot. We started working with them. We freelanced with a bunch of different NFT teams. And it started becoming a bit more of an agency of my friend and I building things for different teams. And then it was I think it was summer camp. They did like they rented out a space here in Berlin to do a co-working space for summer camp. And that was the very first event of crypto that I came to, and that really kind of changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, like the Germany sort of build stations have sort of become like, during our hackathons, it's become really obvious to us that these are some of the most impactful sort of things that we can do. It's like you have a hackathon, but then you have this sort of like collaborative space where there's workshops being done. Everybody's building their own project, but they're helping each other along the way. And like the results have proven to be like, when you look at like our hackathon data, when that summer camp hackathon was happening and Germany did that build station, you saw like the quality of projects, the number of projects in general just sort of like increase because of that. And like now the UK has done it. It happened in Singapore at Benacamp as well. So these are really impactful events. Like a lot of people find their way through like Breakpoint or like hacker houses because those are the sort of like the big, like exciting ones. But it's cool to hear that you sort of came into like to a really sort of like developer focused, I feel like, event. And I'm assuming Max from Mango was probably there. And who else do you remember from that first build station?
So it was all the whole Ultimate team, Ultimate Wallet. Shout out to them. They're like, it's so great to have all these really incredible teams here in Berlin. There was the Big Brain had a bit of a presence, and there was Mango. There was the Neodime guys that are here. And so that was like such a pivotal moment. Because that was when I convinced myself that actually, like, yeah, I can have a career in Web3, and there's products to be built that aren't scams or like funny pictures on the internet, right?
Do you think it was? Do you think a lot of that came from just being surrounded by other people and like that were also super serious about Web3, and you like finally saw that there was a group of like serious people that had a history of software that were trying to build real businesses? Do you think that's like had a lot to do with like that?
Yeah, 100%. I could finally like, I had somebody that I could look up to, basically, that I wanted to be them in like 2 or 3 years, right? And the other thing was that they were so approachable and so helpful. And this is something that I don't know if it really exists in every other industry, but that's kind of like what my experience in Web3 has been. And that really made it that I had the energy and the resources to get so much done. You know, like that initial build station, I wasn't participating in the hackathon. I was just hanging out. But cool. But there was a bounty to add something to Realms, to add some sort of like integration with Solana name service. And back then I was just learning TypeScript, and I remember like looking at like the Realms, the governance UI repo, and it's like, it's a behemoth of a repo. And it's like, shout out to like Sebastian Bohr, like he really helped me a lot. And Daniel Keller from Sunrise Steak, like I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but it was a bit of a goal. You know, if I wasn't going to participate in the hackathon, then let me see if I can do this. And by the end of it, like I won the bounty. My code got merged onto like a Solana Labs repo, and I was like, oh my God, like this is really a stepping stone, right? And yeah, like these events in person are just like huge for the young developers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like these are the sorts of stories that I love to hear, because like after seeing it in Germany, like you sort of made a comment about like having somebody to look up to. Like I think like as these new super teams we're seeing spin up around the world that are pretty fresh, like one thing that Germany had going for it was like some established teams already. But like I think as you start to see these newer super teams, they see some success, they get that 1 or 2 like teams that become successful. Now everybody else that comes into their orbit will probably have the same experience that you did. And then like everybody's in different levels of like, it depends on regions, it depends on a lot of things. But what I'm hearing from you is that like you had some established teams that like you were like, oh wow, these guys are doing it. That's really cool to hear. So you did the build station, you won the bounty for Realms. So after that, like usually there's about a 6-month gap between hackathons. What was Carlos up to in that time frame?
Yeah, so I was encouraged basically by the bounty that I could contribute more to the governance UI repo. And so I got a grant from the Solana Foundation to do some features for it. And once again, that was pivotal for me, like to get paid for software by like what felt like this huge entity. And like, I really felt like I was contributing to something really cool, like governance. And so I got super involved with that. I basically started thinking about what should I do to go to Breakpoint? Like, if I go to Breakpoint, like, who am I? What am I pitching, etc. Like, I wanted to take on something a little bit more serious than like doing some agency work for NFT collections. And I mean it kind of like, I wanted to get deeper into the stack, I guess.
Yep.
And so that's kind of like where the idea for Trigger came about. So a lot of our customers of the NFT collections, they always had these these requests that it was like, can you take something from here and then do something else with it? Like, and it was always like, take something from the chain and do something else. Post it on Twitter, post it on Telegram, post it on Discord. And so I was like, okay, like what would if this and that looked like for Solana? And so we did some mock-ups, put up a little landing page, and then we went to Breakpoint. Me and my buddy that I had been doing this since the coffee shop, right? Shout out to Orion, who just got hired by Squad, so he's another success story. Yeah, so we took that to Breakpoint. Breakpoint was incredible. Like, once again, it was like really cool to see how accomplished and how serious a lot of these teams were, and like they're building real infrastructure. And so a lot of the loudness of Twitter kind of like didn't come through at Breakpoint. And like, I met a ton of developers.
This is the first, we're talking about Breakpoint 2021, right? The very first Breakpoint?
No, Summer Camp was 2022, so Breakpoint 2022.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I actually had my times, my days confused, years anyways. Breakpoint, even though like contrary to popular belief, you see these events and a lot of the pictures that come out of them end up looking like people like having really good time. Like, if you actually spend the time there, like, you realize that it's just like mostly a bunch of nerds just hanging out and talking about building on Solana. Obviously there's other profiles of people there, like especially more recently, like lots of artists, lots of people that are interested in the space from an investment standpoint. But if you go anywhere near the developers area, it's just a bunch of nerds talking about Solana.
Exactly. And like these are the environments that I always wanted to be in from when I started this journey. Also, like, you know, like I'm self-taught, so I was looking for a bit of validation, right? But it was really encouraging to see what people were working on. And once again, I had like a vision of like the type of developer that I could become, right? And like it really broadened like our vision of like what a protocol developer or Web3 developer is. And so we came back from Breakpoint like super excited. And then I took a bit of a vacation. And then when I came back in January, I was like, okay, like my grant from the foundation is over. Like, I just merged my last feature. What am I going to do now? Okay, let me try to see if I can build this trigger thing. And I kind of got into like analysis paralysis. Like, there's so many features of building a protocol, and like I'd never really approached something that big.
For the audience, can we talk about like what trigger is? And this is and by the way, Carl, you placed in the Grizzlython hackathon with Trigger, right? Yeah,
right after that, exactly. So the idea for Trigger was if this then that. So there's like different no-code tools like Zapier or if this and that in Web 2 that people use. People who don't know how to code, they use in order to connect things, different APIs, right? But in a visual editor. And so I wanted to bring that experience into the average person, right? Because development times are super expensive in Web3, like, and because like maybe there are some security situations of like you have to get code audited and stuff for it to be safe. And so like, what if like people could do things in a visual editor? And so with that premise in mind, I kind of got really overwhelmed. And then I was like, okay, like there's this Sandstorm hackathon happening right now. What if I built the absolute smallest iteration of this? And so we literally built just an API to connect Helios webhooks to Zapier. And then in Zapier, we built a little app that allowed people to create different triggers. And so it meant that through this tool that we called Intersect, people could connect, they could do a transaction on Solana, and that could trigger something happening on Zapier.
Right.
To put the transaction into a Google Sheet or to send the message. And we did a few demos for that for Sandstorm, and we won a couple of prizes for the automation track and for the bonk track. And then I was like, wow, like I'd never done a hackathon in my life. Before that, I had no idea what a hackathon was basically. And all of a sudden we won a hackathon. And so that was super exciting. And that was all the validation I needed to be like, okay, let's try for the Grizzlython. And so for the Grizzlython, at this point, I had no idea about anything about Rust, right? So there was the build station here in Berlin. So I went there every day, first person in, last person out, just learning how to write Rust, what Anchor was. At this point, all I'd done was read data from the chain, right? So I was kind of like familiar with reading from RPCs, but that was it. And all of a sudden, we were trying to build a protocol. And so, I read a bunch of code from like Squads, for example, is great. Like a lot of inspiration I took from Squads, from the Marinade program, and like through sheer will and, my teammates throughout the Grizzlython, we put together this demo that allowed you to set basically a limit order in this visual editor. But it was like Lego bricks, right? And that's what it was really powerful, that you could imagine that you could scale this up, and then every protocol could be a little Lego brick, and then anybody could build their own transaction without the need to really know how to code or how they're supposed to go together. So we won fourth place for that, and there was a demo day here in Berlin that we won also some prizes. And then it was kind of just like, okay, let's build this out for real. Like, the entire code had to be refactored, and
of course,
all the hard coded things from the hackathon had to be unhard coded.
Yeah,
as it goes. And for the next almost 6 months, like it was basically just me and a designer, and I kind of hacked at it, and I took it as like, okay, even if I fail, like I will have learned how to program on Solana by the end of it, right? And I learned a ton. We were trying to do some like weird things, like, like Clockwork existed back then. Clockwork is super cool as a sort of like decentralized crank, but we wanted something a little bit more modular and more accessible in terms of being able to crank it from like some random Web2 infrastructure, not necessarily a validator. And then also, if we wanted to extend the types of triggers, we would have had to like PR something into Clockwork. And so I decided that maybe there's a design that allows us to upgrade the program without upgrading the program. So we came up with like these like middlewares. And so we can extend the functionality of the program to CPI into other programs and stuff. And so we played around with a bunch of different things in that design space, and talked to a bunch of teams that wanted to use these sort of things for their own kind of like development purposes, or like cranking, stop losses inside of their protocols. But, in the depth of the bear market and stuff, like I think I was thinking about it from two perspectives. From the engineering side of things, it's a super cool tool to exist. But then from a practical business perspective, it's the unit economics of an API like this or a program like this. It didn't really make sense in my head.
right.
Even if we were like marking something up from the base transaction cost on Solana, like we would have been making like a few thousand lamp ports per transaction. And then like we would have had to scale up so much to get any sizable amount of revenue.
Yeah, you learned a lot though. I mean, like you taught yourself how to build on Solana. So like, I mean, like there's so much value in that in itself.
Yeah, 100%. And so that sort of like taking this, I basically like built up the entirety of the front end, decided that we were going to be monetizing the front end somehow. So we tested out Trigger. We released it to a few folks and decided that the no-code application was getting a little bit too complex, and that it required a lot more scale than we ever imagined. And so took a step back, and Hyperdrive Hackathon came about, and I decided, like, let me experiment. Let's build an entire new app on the same program, But instead of built for automation, what if we built it for only composability or prioritizing composability? And that's what Juicer was. And so I always had the idea of like Trigger as a DeFi first application would be super cool. And then, but it had all these extra things that didn't really make it work any easier. And so by simplifying it into Juicer and making it only about DeFi and less about automation and more about composability in a no-code way, that was a huge unlock.
So with that said, like enter Juicer. Let's sort of give like a for the audience and all the listeners sort of like a high level overview. Like you just sort of as a recap from all this, you built some sort of no code automated stuff that did a bunch of triggers that made building on Solana easier for yourself and also other people. Were actually sort of unable to like see the full long-term vision of that. Just like, and this is a useful exercise for anybody building on Solana, is like you might reach a point in your sort of Solana career where you're like, you build a thing that you had a lot of faith in, you reach a point where you say, this is not sustainable. We're never going to be able to turn this into a business. You turn Trigger into a tool for yourself to build your next thing, which is like a really cool story. So enter Juicer, which is...
Yeah, Juicer is the front end of DeFi, basically. So we're trying to make discoverability, we're trying to solve discoverability, the complexity of DeFi, and we're trying to unify it all into a single app. Like in reality, what we're trying to solve is the problem that when somebody asks you, like, what should I do in DeFi? You have to give them a huge list of like, oh, you need to check out this app, but you need to also know like what their utilization is in their pool. And then like, oh yeah, and this, you can get better yield in this other app, but you should use it for these things. And we're trying to solve all of that and simplify all of DeFi into a single application. And so the idea is that you'll be able to manage your portfolio, but also connect all these different apps together so that the things that you were before doing in 3, 4, 5 different protocols, you can do in the same place.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's an incredible sort of like, this is the first I'm hearing about your sort of like story arc onto Solana through everything. And now landing here with Juicer, and also placing in the Hyperdrive hackathon with that. So, I guess you guys, Juicer is now like live for the public.
Yeah. So recently we started releasing Juicer, and yeah. So of course it comes in steps, but what I learned from Trigger was basically you got to launch as fast as possible, and then iterate from there from real feedback. Ship
fast, break things.
Exactly. And so we're taking a bit of an approach of like aggregating a bunch of data from different protocols and linking out to those protocols. And then slowly you'll be able to start doing those things inside of Juicer. And then afterwards, we'll be able to supercharge your experience with these things called recipes, where we're bringing back all these Lego bricks things between the different protocols and building it into this new application.
What's sort of like the end game for you for like Juicer? What's the end game impact sort of idea for it?
Best case scenario, in 2 to 3 years, Juicer becomes like the place for DeFi on Solana, and not even only on Solana. The idea is that if you think DeFi, you have a place to go where you understand what's happening, and that you can interact with protocols across the entirety of the ecosystem or multiple ecosystems in a single place. Everybody has their own marketing departments. And so sometimes as a user, it's hard to know like, oh, how does this protocol call this thing? And how does that protocol call this thing? Or how do they do their math? So by unifying it, we're lowering the barrier to entry to all of DeFi, to hopefully be able to bring a bunch of new users into DeFi and then have them feel safe and have them understand what's happening without them having to like read a real book or like spend thousands of hours on crypto Twitter to understand what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's like the user experience, and not just because the products aren't user friendly, is just it's really challenging for new people to come in here. I mean, like, number one, the perception of crypto in general, and then number two, like, some of these products are very scary for a lot of people. Part of it, all though, is because a lot of people weren't even taught traditional finance. So how you expect them to come in here and like I actually learned most of my financial knowledge from DeFi, because we're not really taught it too much, like, financial stuff, and at least in the West we're not. Like, I had very little knowledge of how a lot of these financial markets work until DeFi. So it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are exactly like that. Like, a lot of people know, the earn button in their bank app, and they know how to click it, and they know how to maybe invest into a couple of things in the same app. And like, DeFi can do all these things, it's just like we've chosen not to yet. And so the idea is to maybe bridge that gap somehow.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on placing and 2 hackathons, and obviously the most recent one. And so, again, incredible story arc, and hopefully, like, we continue to see Carlos in the future, and Juicer. So to move on to sort of the next segment of the show, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I want you to sort of like answer these like as concise as possible, like and they're pretty poignant questions. So like, what's like, and you'll be, I've had everything from core engineers and all over the spectrum. So answers vary sort of like widely. What was your, or what sucks about building on Solana?
For me, like, vague errors are the bane of my existence.
I've heard this a few times.
There's also just a lack of documentation, or there was, at least for a long time.
Oh yeah,
when I was learning how to do all these things.
2021,
like,
you were pretty much screwed unless you knew how to read source code and tests.
Yeah, and or search on Discord, right? And it's really, really, really painful for a new developer, especially if they're a new developer. If you're already an engineer, maybe it's a different story, right? But for me, it was really, really painful that when you're working on the edge, there's no documentation, there's no example code. You basically have to get really good at reading open source code. And back then also, there wasn't a ton of it. Like, now there's so much more. Like, the Solana program examples is an incredible repo. But yeah, vague errors is the bane of my existence.
Yeah, we have there's multiple flavors of Solana courses. There's 8-week boot camps, like, globally. Like, there's so much more than whenever you were there, or learning through your experience. But honestly, like, I tell this to some people, like, as much as it was painful in the beginning, it was sort of like this moat for really incredible engineering talent, because that's who it didn't attract a bunch of what old heads like to call script kiddies, people who could just go and like copy and paste some snippets. So the base foundation of Solana engineers were either already gigabrain, or somebody like you who just like was super dedicated to like getting on the other side and figuring all that stuff out. So it really started Solana, like the Solana ecosystem, out with a really strong core base of engineers. And then those engineers continue to help other people, as I'm sure that you've mentored people like along the way as well. So, yeah, it's, I mean, like, all this stuff, like, we have recurring themes around here: dependency hell, errors. There's always a,
oh my God, dependency hell. Don't get me started.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
So outside of that, like, what would you say, like what is, like, aside from the standard sort of like it's fast, it's cheap, or whatever stuff, like what else would you say is like what's good about building on Solana? What makes you excited about it? It could be anything. It doesn't have to be specifically technical.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't choose Solana. Solana kind of chose me. So I don't know what it's like in other ecosystems, but what made the difference for me was Super Team. Like, the fact that I had a community around me, supporting me, giving me the resources that I needed, providing me any introduction I ever needed, that was pivotal in my journey, and it's something that I always want to share with other people. It's like, first of all, just get involved in the community, create your own local community, because it's in these physical spaces where you are really able to advance at a much, much faster degree than you would on your own.
Yeah, I mean, like this, like Akshay, who like helped sort of like coin the term, and also along with a couple others, we started, whenever they started Super Team India, the very first one, he was talking to me about communities and like bottoms up, and like talking a bunch of, like, I was just like an engineer doing DevRel. I was like, what the hell is this guy even talking about? And then, and I've told this story before, and I don't know if I told it on this show, is that Jacob Creech, like, who's head of DevRel now, came up with the Solana cookbook. We were like, we need code snippets. We need like something to like, so that people weren't in Discord and being told to go look at the tests if they want to know how to send a transaction on Solana. So I told Akshay about it. He was like, this is exactly the perfect example of how we can leverage these communities. So he just like deployed Super Team India onto the Solana cookbook and had 80% of all the stuff that we wanted filled out in about 2 weeks. And then I was like, holy shit, this is like the power of communities. And like, so now, of course, over time, as the new super teams are getting spun up and watching the build stations and watching those collaborations, you start to realize a pattern of like, this is how you build bottoms up communities. And it's just like networks of support across networks of support. I mean, like, and nobody really says it out loud, but like Super Team is very much like a network state. And like it has its own GDP, and like it's been incredible to watch. So I'm glad you had that experience, and I'm glad that you feel that way about super teams, because I think this is like an important like thing that's happening right now. So, and I'm excited to see what's coming next in 2024 with super teams. So
yeah, me too.
So to wrap it all up, you kind of gave a really good one there, but like I'm gonna like about like what advice would you give to a new developer coming on Solana? Like whether they're new or they're just getting started, like what sort of advice would you give them to like help achieve success? You just gave one good example about like in real life joining a community, being part of this, and like, but like if you had to give another piece of advice to somebody brand new or just getting started, what would you say?
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask. Like, it's crazy how approachable everybody is in the ecosystem. I read a lot of open source code, actually. Like, get good at that, because like that's what's really going to set you apart. And what else? I mean, it's all kind of path dependent, but yeah, I mean, just get involved, honestly, because like at the end of the day, it's still hard. Don't get me wrong. And it's a lot easier than it used to be. But you need a community around you to help you push through those barriers when it gets really, really tough.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have a lot of on Solana.
Yeah, I think like a lot of times there's definitely certain profiles of people, especially younger people, that are afraid to ask questions, or there's certain people that are afraid to like ask dumb questions. Like, I love asking dumb questions, because if you don't ask them, then you'll never know the answers to them. Like, so it really is just like ask questions, go out there and just like be active and be, don't be afraid to engage with people. There's 1,000 more Carloses out there that are going to help you if you need the help. Thanks for coming on the show, man. Like, it was a pleasure to have you. It was awesome to hear the journey of you getting started and knowing that you never even had a Web 2 software job in your life, and worked at a coffee shop while you were learning to build. And then even on top of that, congratulations on your recent victory in the Hyperdrive Hackathon. So with that said, man, again, thanks for joining, and see you around.
Thanks so much.
All right.
I enjoyed it.
Cheers.